You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 92, Speaking Tunisian Arabic and Afrikaans. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast and conversation with multilinguals. My guest today is Liza, who joins me to talk about her languages of Tunisian Arabic and Afrikaans. In this episode, we travel from the north to the south of Africa. Liza talks about how she started learning the Tunisian dialect of Arabic and how her knowledge of French plays a role in helping to communicate in this dialect. We talk about code switching in Tunisian and conjugation patterns of Arabic spoken in North Africa that share similarities with Tamazigh. We talk about what Western ideology gets wrong about the Arabic-speaking world, and Liza even tells us what Tunisian has in common with Afrikaans. We also talk a bit about her native Afrikaans language and its place among other languages of South Africa, including a full circle moment with a clear connection to the Arabic language. Big thank you to Liza for this thoughtful conversation about your languages. If you enjoyed this episode of Speaking Tongues, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts, and like and subscribe on YouTube so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. And if you've been a longtime listener of the show or even a recent listener, you can now support the show on buymeacoffee.com. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Liza. How are you today, Liza?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for inviting me to the show.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to talk to you today. And we're going to be talking about Arabic, but a very specific dialect of Arabic. So I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
So my first language is Afrikaans. That's the one that I still speak to my family, even though I don't live in South Africa. And then, obviously, I learned to speak English. And I also speak French. And at the moment, I am in the process of learning Tunisian Arabic and Spanish.
Oh, exciting. What led you to speaking, or what led you to learning specifically Tunisian Arabic?
So it started by me meeting somebody who is from Tunisia here in Texas. And because I studied linguistics and I'm just generally interested in languages, and we really did not cover Semitic languages in our linguistics course in university. It was very focused on Indo-European. I was just curious and was asked if he could teach me a couple of words. And of course, it was mostly cuss words, but that's interesting too. But then when I got home, I thought, let me read a little bit about this. I don't know anything about Arabic. And the more I read, the more interesting it seemed. So after a couple of days, I saw that person again and I was like, I think I might just, learn a couple more words. And they were not supportive. They said, oh, it's really difficult. Like, I don't think you can do that. So I decided at first mostly to just learn it out of spite. I don't like people telling me that it's too difficult and that I can't do stuff. But the more I kept going, the more I was interested. And I've met really fantastic people through learning it. And I'm by no means a competent speaker, but I try, and I really, really enjoy it. It turned out to be a much more enriching experience than I anticipated.
Yeah, that's what matters. We like trying here on this podcast.
Yeah.
So, I always encourage people to try. What do you think that it was when you first encountered this dialect of Arabic? What was it that enraptured you? What hooked you?
I think what I really, really found interesting to begin with is that it's a country that had a lot of contact with other languages. And as a result, Tunisian Arabic was very influenced by the other languages that it's had contact with. And that very much reminded me of the history of Afrikaans too, because Afrikaans was very influenced by other languages that it had contact with, which caused it to diverge in such a drastic way from Dutch. So immediately I thought, oh, it's a language with a smaller number of people, just like my maternal language. And it's been very influenced by cultural contact, just like my maternal language. And I liked the idea of a language with sort of I don't want to say checkered because that's like a negative connotation, but a interesting and diverse background. And also there is a lot of French that is used. And since I spoke French already, not particularly good at the time when I started, but much better now, but it felt a lot more accessible to me than other dialects of Arabic, because I figured if I run out of words or if I can't express myself, I can just throw in French and hope for the best. And as it turns out, that's a solid strategy.
Really?
Yes.
So
luckily.
with people you've encountered, have you encountered a lot of code switching? And
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. There is a high degree of bilingualism in Tunisia. I have really not met very many people who don't either speak French or English or both, in addition to Arabic. Of course, there are some people. There's always kids in school who are just, languages is not their passion, and they just get through the coursework and they don't really have a functional use of it after school. But most people they absolutely can get by, or they speak it very competently. And the amount of code switching in Tunisian Arabic with French words, it is a high frequency.
Wow. Do you have an example or anything you could think of in like how that would be used, of maybe?
Oh, absolutely, because it is so common. So the French word donc, which means so, is used as a connector all the time. Like you're going to hear it absolutely everywhere. And the word programme, like program, is used to mean like your schedule or your plan. And that's used, people will say like, what's your program for the day? But the sentence will be in Arabic and they'll just use programme, and then they'll put the Arabic possessive endings on it. So the words are very incorporated into Tunisian.
Oh, that is so cool. That's really, really cool. I was going to take a step back and I was going to talk about, I think it's really interesting that you made the connection between your mother language, Afrikaans, and the Tunisian dialect, and how it's spoken by a smaller number of people and it's so influenced by another language. And I think that's what's really interesting about African languages on a whole, looking at the continent, is that there are thousands of languages spoken in the continent.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, I'm not familiar with all of them yet, but but I think that because, unfortunately, with colonialism and those influences that came into, the cultures and the languages there is a lot of influence from French, if that was the colonizing force, or Dutch in the case of Afrikaans. And I just think, I'm saying all this really just to say like how fascinating language is, and how people are able to take two things and turn it into a third thing. It's like kind of like having a baby maybe, but it's just like
I mean, it kind of is. And it is also, it's a testament to how endlessly creative people are when it comes to language and how to use them, and how language is tied into identity, where people who had no control over the situation were colonized by European powers and had languages imposed on them, but they still just took those languages and sort of reinterpreted them and incorporated them, and now they're using it like it's their own thing. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's really beautiful. Have you had any other contact with any other dialects of Arabic?
I have more recently.
Okay.
Because I started a French group, and one of the people who started coming to the group is a woman from Lebanon. And she was very perplexed, I think is the right word, that I'm learning Tunisian Arabic. Like, why would you do that? There aren't a lot of speakers. Why aren't you learning Egyptian? I'm like, I don't know. I just found Tunisian first and I was enchanted. So I don't know what to tell you. But she decided to start an Arabic group and invited me. And usually it's people with all different dialects. Like she obviously speaks Lebanese. There is a Moroccan guy. Sometimes there's an Algerian guy. Those are the two who I tend to understand the best, but also still not very well.
Okay.
Sometimes there's people who have a Palestinian background or who are from Syria. One time there was somebody from Saudi Arabia. Those people, I try. I don't know what they're saying. And whenever we'll kind of go around the table and say, oh, this person speaks Syrian. And then when it gets to me, I'll be like, I'm learning Tunisian. So just like upfront, sorry, you're not going to understand most of what I say.
Is that, and that's where I was going with this. Is that typical of where like Tunisian Arabic is not so widely understood because it's that different? Or is it that the other dialects, specifically like Levantine or Gulf Arabic or Egyptian, are they just so different from one another? What have you noticed?
So there definitely is a high amount of difference. So my Tunisian tutor said that there is a higher amount of difference between some of the Arabic dialects than there is between, say, Spanish and Italian.
Wow.
But I think that in general, Arabic-speaking people have a very high tolerance for ambiguity, where if we hear two words that seem mostly related, but the one has vowels where you don't expect it, we don't immediately think, oh, that's probably that other word I know, and they're just pronouncing it in a different way. We expect it to be a completely new word, and we feel like we're not understanding the context. But for them, and of course, I'm not an Arabic person, so people may disagree with me, but this is my perception as a learner, is that people are very open to the idea that I probably already know this word, and I just need to kind of figure out based on the context what you're likely saying. Yeah. The other example that I heard of how different it is a Tunisian I know who learned German and then went to Switzerland. And he was like, I couldn't understand Swiss German. It's just so different. So for German speakers, maybe that's a good comparison. Me not being a German speaker, all I can do is believe him.
And I wonder, I mean, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but, you know, in talking about that, I wonder as an Afrikaans speaker, you know, if you're speaking to someone from the Netherlands or someone from, you know, Suriname, for example, someone who speaks Dutch, like the intelligibility there probably, you know, I mean, it is a different language at this point, but being that it was influenced by that Dutch language, I often wonder what it would be like being an Afrikaans speaker and, you know, being in the Netherlands or Belgium or something where, you know, the language is different. Maybe like a
we
grandparent.
definitely have a high degree of mutual intelligibility.
Okay.
It is also an asymmetric relationship where Dutch people tend to understand more Afrikaans than we do Dutch, because Afrikaans is so simplified. Like we really just have one version of a past tense, and in Dutch there are multiple. So if I'm listening to Dutch, I'm not always understanding the subtleties when people use different past tense constructions for where exactly in the past it places it. It helps now that I speak other languages, I have more of a guess of what's going on. But there are definitely things that can be misunderstood. There are also words that are the same but that have a different meaning, so false friends. And we dropped all of the case endings in Afrikaans. And for a Dutch speaker, it sounds more like a child who hasn't quite learned where your case endings are supposed to go. But for us listening to them, it's a little harder to figure out if this is some sort of specific participle of a word or if this is just your standard version of the word. And the other thing that is a little hard if you haven't been exposed to Dutch is that the vowels sound very different. Pretty significant vowel shift between Afrikaans and Dutch. I happen to have a friend here who speaks Dutch, and so I've heard it a lot, and our conversations usually she'll speak Dutch and I'll speak Afrikaans. So I understand it really well now. I'll listen to podcasts, but I cannot speak it.
Right.
if I try to speak it, I just end up speaking Afrikaans. Yeah.
I have to say, I love this worldwide tour we're going on with all these languages. This is fun. This is really fun. Um, you did mention that you feel like I think you said Algerian and Moroccan
Mhm.
are the two dialects that you feel like you can navigate well in
Yes.
Arabic.
Yeah.
What is it about those two that that helps you?
So, uh, and I have to say that Libyan might be part of this continuum. It's just that I don't know anyone from Libya, so I don't want to disregard that country that is also a North African Arabic speaking country. But for Algeria and Morocco, they also both have a history of being colonized by France. So there is a high degree of French that is used in daily life. But also, all of those countries have a substrate of Amazigh languages.
Mm.
And because of that, like the way that the conjugation works in the North African dialects is something that comes from Amazigh. And also the conjugation pattern in the North African dialects are different from in the other dialects, but it's the same. So I understand what they mean when they're conjugating verbs. Even if I don't know the verb, I at least know who we're talking about. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm teach me how to say this word because I've seen it written, but I've never heard anyone say it. Amazigh,
Amazigh. Yeah.
Amazigh. Okay, and that's like
Yeah,
the Berber language.
that's correct. So technically, if we're saying the language, we should be saying Tamazigh.
Tamazigh.
Yeah, with a T in the front and the end. And
Oh.
Amazigh is the people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. This is an instance of when, when you've only seen a word written and you don't know how it's
Right.
spoken. So I'm like, I don't want to miss this opportunity to learn how to say it.
Yeah, I
Um,
have been extremely fortunate that one of the people who started coming to my French group is an Algerian who grew up speaking Tamazigh at home. So I had the privilege of hearing him pronounce it and being like, "Oh, is that how to?" Thanks. Now I know how to say it.
Now
Yay!
I know. And what?
Yeah.
Recently I was looking up the alphabet and I was like, oh my goodness, this alphabet is stunning. Like,
Right?
it's
It
so
is completely
beautiful.
different. I think the first time I ever saw it was maybe in the video game Civilization,
Mm.
where you had to sort of pick which empire you wanted to be in, and they would have writing. Um, that's the first time that I saw those characters, but I had no idea what they were or where they come from or who they were related to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tunisian Arabic. Tell us what you've learned so far. Tell us some things, I guess, about Tunisian dialect that you've noticed or things that you've learned so far that stand out to you and some things that you've enjoyed learning about the language so far.
Okay. I think the thing that I like the most, and this is not just something that I like in Tunisian, I'm just a fan of reduplication in general. So, for people who don't know, reduplication is when you have a word that repeats. It's not used hugely in English. We tend to use it in a way like if somebody says, "Oh, he's rich," and then you see his giant mansion, you go, "Oh, he's rich, rich."
Mm.
That kind of use, right? But so in Tunisian Arabic, for instance, the word for an hour is sa, and it has that ein sound in the middle. So sa. And then to say sometimes, you just reduplicate the word. So you can say sa, sa. Or you can put the dual ending on it and say sa'atin, because you reduplicated it, so you can make it a plural if you want. And the word that most people know for how is kaif, but in Tunisian it's pronounced kif. But if you reduplicate it, if you say kif kif, it means the same. Something is the same. It's kif kif. And that is actually a term that has been pulled into French and is used as French slang now. And also as a verb, kiffer, to like something in French now.
Kife. I'm so glad that you said that because I'm learning French. I gotta stop saying I'm learning because I know French. I'm improving my French. I'm
There
trying to
you go.
level up in French. And I've learned that kiffe, I've learned it recently and that it comes from Arabic, but I didn't know like where in Arabic it comes from or specifically what it means.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to use that instead of saying like, because kife means like if something, like if you like something,
Yeah, exactly. You can
right?
use it. You can use it in the place of eme.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
in my trying to be more like spontaneous, I try to use like je kiffe instead of saying like j'aime. And
Uh huh.
it just never comes out. And like, because I forget about it. And it's it's a thing that I learned from, you know, native speakers or people who are more advanced than me. But I
Mm.
feel like I still am like, you know, I'm stuck on MA and I I need to get past.
There's quite a high number of words that come from North African dialects that are now being used in French as slang words. So, not only did French have quite a big influence on Tunisian Arabic and the neighboring dialects, but the opposite is also true. So, you may have heard the slang word for money in French as flous, and that is just the word for money in Tunisian Arabic.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you can use it to sound cooler. And quite recently, I was watching something. This is always my approach. Can I sound so much cooler than I actually am? Let me use that slang. So quite recently, I was watching a French game show where the host was telling somebody to quickly come over and said "fisa fisa," and "fisa" means fast in Tunisian Arabic. I
Wow.
I, I went back and listened again, like that. Am I hallucinating Arabic words? No, I'm not. They're saying it now. How exciting. There are so many constructions like this. Like, for instance, the word for knock, or really the word for your heartbeat, like one beat of your heart is dak with qaf at the end. But if you reduplicate it, dak dak, that's to knock on a door.
Oh,
So
talk
it's that
talk.
repetitive, it's almost like an onomatopoeia if you
Mm-hmm.
think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love reduplication. There's
It's
also reduplication in Afrikaans.
is there.
Yeah, and it's influenced South African English. The best example I can think of is the word for now in Afrikaans is nou. So we use now to mean, we use it like ahorita in Spanish, where it's
Mm.
like in a bit, but non-specific. I might not do it. Maybe it'll be in a week. Maybe it'll be in 5 minutes. I'll do it now. So what I just said, I'll do it now, is how South African English speakers will use it. They
Whoa.
just went, this is a useful non-committal way to express time. We're just gonna yoink, thanks. And then quite similarly, the word for now in Tunisian Arabic is tawa. But if you reduplicate it and you say tau tau, instead of it being a non-specific future time, that is used to mean immediately, this specific moment. You have to do it
Mm.
now. Tau tau.
Tao tao.
Tawa tau. That's just something that delights me. Whenever I find new reduplication, I write them down and I try to use them
Mm-hmm.
just because they please me. But I can't really speak to the differences between Tunisian Arabic and other dialects, mostly because I don't understand other dialects.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but I did quite recently finish the Duolingo tree for Standard Arabic, which my goal for starting it, I know people have lots of strong opinions about Duolingo, and that's fine. But I wanted just a way to expose myself to the writing system and to learn how to read it better.
Mm-hmm.
And for that goal, it was fantastic. But I also got all of this free exposure to the standard dialect. So now I at least have an idea of how some basic grammatical structures work.
Mm-hmm.
And there are such differences with Tunisian Arabic. Sometimes I would read the sentences that Duolingo was giving me and think about, how would I say this in Tunisian? And I noticed that every single word that I know for clothing in Tunisian is different in Standard Arabic. It doesn't mean that it is not comprehensible, but an example I can give you is the word for pants in Tunisian Arabic that are used is serwel. But in Standard Arabic, that is, if you think of what we would think of like Aladdin pants, that is serwel. But in Tunisian, it's just pants.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you wanted to say jeans, you say serwel jean. So for somebody who doesn't know, the first picture in their mind might be like, so what, like Aladdin pants and denim? Like, what are you talking? But no, it's just pants. Yeah. And like the word for shirt in standard Arabic is camisa, like the Spanish word, but
Mm-hmm.
in Tunisian Arabic it's mariul. That's not even related.
No.
Yeah. And then there are Spanish words in Tunisian Arabic because after the Moors were expelled from Spain, quite a lot of them went to Tunisia. So, like the word for shoes in Tunisian is sabat, like zapatos.
Zapatos.
Right.
This is everything right now. This is great.
But this is also a reason why, for people who have not been exposed to Tunisian, it can be hard to follow.
Mm.
There are also a bunch of Italian loan words. The words for socks is closet. I'm not sure if that comes from like calcita,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm not sure if it comes from Italian or Spanish. It's one of the two. It's definitely not a word from French.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible.
Have you been to Tunisia?
I have, yes.
Okay, let's hear all about it.
I went pretty quickly after starting to learn the dialect. Part of the reason why, when I started reading about Tunisia, and then I thought, man, I don't really know anything about this country. I know it's in North Africa, but not much more. And when I started looking at pictures of it online, I thought, this place is amazing. It's very much like the picture that I think most Westerners can think when you think of like Greek islands, where all the buildings are painted white and the windows and the roofs are blue painted. Those are the pictures you're going to see when you look at Tunisia. There's a specific city called Sidi Bou Said that is it looks just like that. So it's all Mediterranean. It's just on the other side of the Mediterranean. I think everyone should go visit. It's fantastic. Most people speak French. Most people speak English. You can get by if you're in the touristy areas. And it is also much less expensive than going to Europe. Fantastic beaches. The one entire side of the country is just beach.
Oh, no.
And it's white sand beaches, and the water is wonderful, and the food is fantastic. If you like spicy food, if you enjoy eating fish, like just whole fish, it's so good. It's fantastic.
I might shed a tear. I might shed a tear because
I had such a good time. I have to say, I think that in the West, we have an idea of Arabic countries. And that idea is not representative of all of the Arabic countries, because Morocco is an Arabic country, and then all the way through Syria, it's the same amount of distance as like from Spain to Turkey. So it is a lot of different cultures that just happen to have a unifying language and a unifying religion, but how strictly people interact with their religious beliefs vary greatly from country to country. Like in Tunisia, there isn't any kind of expectation that women cover their hair, for instance. I haven't ever when I was there. Just out of respect, you probably don't want to wear super duper short shorts, but I did see tourists who were dressed like that, and no one was doing anything. You can go to the beach and wear whatever kind of bathing suit you want. Probably not something that exposed quite a lot of the backside. Maybe on the slightly more conservative end of things is a better option. But I went in a two-piece, and there were other people wearing two-pieces, and everyone's just fine with it. I think in general, Tunisians are very open and very liberal and very accepting of other cultures. And it might partly be because of the history of having had a contact with quite a different amount of colonizing powers in the country. But I also just think that the people are open and friendly. And if you learn like 3 words in Tunisian, they are going to be so thrilled because I was speaking to a taxi driver who was so shocked that I could speak to him. And right before that, I spoke to a Tunisian woman on the street, and she was like, Americans don't learn Tunisian. I was like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm like kind of not a real American. I'm like a fake American, but still, there are Americans who've learned Tunisian. Like, it's not against the rules.
Yeah.
And it's fun.
And it's fun too. I'm glad that you pointed that out about just basically the Arabic speaking world and North Africa not being monolithic, and that we do have, especially in the United States, and I try to speak out about this every chance I get. We have such a terrible vision idea of
Right.
what the Arab world looks like, and I think that we so often I'm saying we, but I'm really excluding myself from this because I get it, but I feel like as a country, as a part of the world, like we just have the wrong idea, and we often ignore the depth of riches that exists in the
Exactly.
Arab speaking world, in the
No, I
Arabic speaking
completely
world.
agree with you. I think
Yeah,
it's sort of as a general cultural view since 9/11,
hmm,
whenever we have seen Arabic people on the news, it has not been in a positive light. And
exactly.
of course, there are plenty of people who are quite extreme in their views, just like with other religions. Yeah, so
Hello, Christianity.
hi there. Yeah, but
People
I
can
really
be extreme
recommend.
anywhere. Yeah.
Exactly. Every country has their extremists who think that it's their way or the highway. Boy, do I ever know that coming from South Africa.
And living in Texas.
And living in Texas, yes. I would love to tell you some more about differences between Tunisian Arabic and Standard Arabic. Just so, because I know it is so much easier if you're in the US and you're interested in Arabic, that most schools just teach Standard Arabic. And I had no idea about the amount of diglossia that is just the normal thing in Arabic speaking countries. And I also did not realize how much of a difference there can be between dialects and the Standard Arabic. Like, I was really quite shocked. Because when you speak to Arabic speakers, they will tell you it's a dialect, or they'll even say it's an accent.
Mm,
And for me, an accent is like saying tomato versus tomato.
hmm.
That's what I think. I don't think that you have a set of completely different words and then you say it's an accent.
Right.
People have also, when I've said, oh, I'm learning Tunisian Arabic, Arabic speakers have said, that's not a language.
Oh no.
And I'd go, that's cool that you have an opinion. I don't really care about your opinion.
Hmm.
There is no clear scientific agreed upon definition between the difference between a dialect and a language. So I'm not getting into that argument with anybody.
Right.
But if you are somebody who learned Standard Arabic, say in college, and then you travel to somewhere like Tunisia, you're gonna have kind of a hard time. And this is because, for people who don't know, diglossia is when you have two different versions of a language, or maybe, I don't know, is it specifically the same language, but that are used in conjunction with each other.
Mm.
So the standard dialect is used for, say, the news, and it's used in school, and books tend to be written in the standard dialect. So everyone learns it in school, but people don't speak it at home. And even when people understand it very well, if they have to speak in it, their native dialects is right there influencing the way that they talk.
I see.
And a lot of the words are very different when you look at a dialect like Tunisian versus Standard Arabic.
Hmm.
And that is because Tunisian have been colonized by so many different European powers. There was the Italians and the French, and the Turks were there for a while.
Mm.
And there was a huge influx of people who came from Spain. So all of that have had an influence on the language, but also the people who were there first, the Tamazigh people, is a very significant substrate in the language. And there is quite a large number of words in common Tunisian Arabic that come from Tamazigh. And I found a list of words, and I was so surprised that me as a learner knew quite a large number of them.
Wow.
They are that frequent, like a lot of animal words, a lot of
Hmm.
food words. And when I shared this with my friend who I speak to absolutely all the time, I was like, do you know these words? He said, I didn't know. I didn't know that they were Amazigh words. I didn't know that I knew words that come from my like cultural heritage. So I think part of the reason is that people don't learn about their dialects in school.
Hmm.
And it reminded me a little of how in the US, if you speak something other than the standard dialect, because the way that language is taught in school is so prescriptivist, people frequently are told stuff like, you talk wrong. The way that you talk is not proper. You need to learn how to do it properly.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a prescriptivist point of view.
Right.
Dialects are not wrong. Dialects are just different.
Right. Right.
And dialects are valid, and dialects should be celebrated, because dialects is identity. And when you're telling people the way that they talk is wrong, you're also dismissing the identity and the culture that is part of how that dialect formed in the first place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is the point of my show.
Yay!
This is why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I want people to understand that there's nothing broken about your language. There's nothing wrong
Right.
about it. There's nothing that is less than about it. You have a
Exactly.
language, it's attached to a culture. You speak it, your relatives, your parents speak it, you speak it with your partners, your friends, your boss, whoever. It's valid. It matters.
Exactly.
And we have to
Exactly.
celebrate that. And this is why I do episodes on Tunisian
Right.
Arabic. And I'm not
Right.
just saying, like, let's just talk about Arabic once and call it a day and never talk about
Right.
it again, because it changes, it varies. And that goes with every language.
Dialects are very much thought of as not being as valid.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But here's some main examples, because in the US people are told, oh, you should learn Standard Arabic, and then you can go to any Arabic country and talk to them. And that is true. It is a fact. But the thing is, when they respond to you, you're going to get stuck because most people don't use Standard Arabic in their day-to-day life, and dialectal words and different constructions are going to creep in. Yeah, it's going to make it hard. So in Arabic, there are a male and a female version of you. And the male one is enta, and the female one is enti. But in Tunisian Arabic, everyone is enti. Tunisian is the only dialect that only uses one version to say you. And I don't know why, but the one that they ended up with is the one that is the female version for other dialects. But it's not like Tunisians think about it as, oh, we use the female you. It just means you. It's just the same for everybody. And the conjugation patterns are different. So in Tunisian, if I want to conjugate a verb to say that I am the one doing it, I put an N suffix in front of it, just a letter N. But in Standard Arabic, if I put the N suffix in front of a verb, that means we're doing it. So already, even if the verb is familiar to somebody who learned Standard Arabic, if I'm talking about myself, they're going to think that I'm talking about me and somebody else. Or that I'm, for some reason, referring to myself in the royal we or something.
The royal we.
And then there are words that are very familiar to people. They exist in Standard Arabic, but there's been semantic shifts, so they mean something else in Tunisian. And these are high frequency words. Like, for instance, the word, if I say nemshi, that means I go, but it also means I walk. But in Standard Arabic, this word only means I walk. And if I wanted to say I walk in Standard Arabic, I have to say emshi without an N in the front, because nemshi would mean we walk.
Right.
So in Tunisian, you can use this verb to say I go by car or I go by plane. But so if I'm saying I go by plane, somebody who only learns Standard Arabic is going to hear we walk by plane, which maybe they'll figure out. The context will be enough, but still it's going to be unexpected and a little weird.
Yeah. Okay, let's go from North Africa to South Africa.
All the way south.
Let's go all the way south. As you said, Afrikaans is your mother language, and you did grow up in South Africa. We should know there's so many languages spoken in South Africa, and I know there are a number of official ones and maybe ones that are not, like, quote, official.
That's correct.
But with so much history and all these languages being spoken, and South Africa has had its own political struggles and racial struggles and etc. How do you notice, or how did you notice when you were living there? Because you grew up there, but
Mhm.
how did you notice at all that the languages are interchanged, or how do you notice that they connected people?
So South Africa has 11 official languages, and in the area of the country where I grew up, um, I would say that the white population were primarily Afrikaans speaking. There are some English speaking South Africans, but in the area where I lived, it's the minority. And then there were primarily Tswana speakers when I was little. But I think there's a lot more movement of people now and that more languages are used. But I'm not going to be the expert because I don't currently live there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it is extremely normal for people to be bilingual. And I would say, in general, bilingualism is an expectation from somebody who speaks Afrikaans. We all learn English in school. English speaking white South Africans, when I was growing up, also learned Afrikaans in school, but and broadly speaking, of course, there are going to be people who speak Afrikaans well, but in general, not so much.
Mm.
So, like, if I speak to somebody who is an English first language South African, I always switch to English to accommodate them. And then for the non-white population, having to learn Afrikaans and English was absolutely just a survival requirement in order to get by. If you couldn't speak to the people who were the only source of income because of that system of apartheid, then what were you going to do? And because of this language contact, there are quite a lot of loanwords from the different languages that are used just generally to people. I think that so apartheid ended in 1994, and people love to say, oh, it's been so long. Just get over it. It has not been that long. When I was in elementary school, my school was segregated.
Mm.
And I'm not that old, so it really, really hasn't been that long. And I think it was an unfortunate choice that the architects of apartheid very much pulled Afrikaans into the identity of the people who were actively oppressing other people.
Mm.
In fact, I just quite recently learned, or I read, that one of the speeches that were given in Afrikaans, the person who was given, where he was like, this is what we're going to do now. We're going to have this system. We're in charge. Everyone else is inferior to us. And he used this term. He said it is required for people to have Eendesdenkenheid, which means like the same way of thinking. One-mindedness, I think, is maybe a good translation, where he said, like, either you're with us or you're against us, to the point where if you did not agree with that system as a white person, people would say you're a race traitor, and people had to flee the country. You could go to jail. It was on par with treason to say, I don't agree with what you're doing. And because of that idea of we're somehow superior was so entrenched in the culture that even though there is a lot of efforts to be more inclusive and more egalitarian, I think it's going to be a while. I think it's a complicated thing. There are many sides to it, and it is quite unfortunate that now for the language, because for me, I love languages so much, but you cannot talk about Afrikaans without also thinking about the cultural context and the way that other people in the country experience it, because for them it very much was just and remains still the language of the oppressor.
Right.
But on the other hand, it is also important to note that the majority of people who speak Afrikaans at home are not white. But also, the white Afrikaans speakers don't necessarily want to include the non-white speakers into their cultural group. Yeah, so it's a thorny issue.
In an attempt to just isolate the language, which, as we know, can't really truly be isolated, but in an attempt to isolate Afrikaans and just talk about it as a language, um, what are some things that tell us some things about the language, and maybe what you would want people to know who don't speak Afrikaans, or maybe interested in the language or interested in South Africa? Like, what are some things that set it apart? What are some things you love about it? What are some interesting quirks of the language itself?
So I think that there has been an interesting revival in how Afrikaans is used.
Mm.
There are quite a lot of rappers. You may have heard of the group Die Antwoord. Maybe you've heard of them as Die Antwoord.
Yes,
Oh, look at that.
I've shame on me. I've seen the name, and
Mhm.
I actually think that a friend of an old coworker of mine used to listen to them at work.
Mhm.
Um, and he probably called them Die Antwoord. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's a South African group. They use
okay,
Afrikaans sometimes.
okay.
But also, Afrikaans is being reclaimed by the brown people who speak it. I'm not super up to date with what's going on with music there, but quite some time ago, I discovered this rap group called Brasse van die Kaap. So, brasse is a word like bros, I guess, and from the Cape.
Oh,
And so they had rap, and they may still be together. I'm not sure. It's been a while. I'm an old person, but this was one of my first like wide exposures to the dialect of Afrikaans that is spoken there. Yeah, so there's a lot of music going on, a lot of exciting things. There's a lot of literature in Afrikaans. There is a strong history of poetry, and if you already speak another language that is related to Dutch, or that is a daughter language of Dutch, like Afrikaans is, you're going to be able to understand quite a lot.
okay.
We do have loanwords from a lot of the other languages that Afrikaans have had contact with, but if you just kind of approach that as like interesting spice, then it's
Yeah,
fine. I
that's
think
really
that Afrikaans
interesting.
is easy to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Some things that would make it very easy to learn, for instance, is that all of our verbs are regular, which is great news. And also, we don't conjugate verbs. The form, it's a lot like English, right? So if you think about, if we drop that s that we stick onto he she
Mm-hmm.
and just said sit he sit, that's how Afrikaans work. Everything is just exactly the same for everybody. We also
Easy.
don't have grammatical gender, just like English. There are actually quite a few lines that can be drawn between how English lost a lot of its like case endings and inflections and things. Same thing happened in Afrikaans.
Mm.
But we
Okay.
also have really cool loanwords. Like there are loanwords from Khoi languages. Like the word for a bug is chocha, chocha,
Hoja.
chocha, and that comes from Khoisan languages. And our word for umbrella comes from Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
Sombril, which you'll hear a cognate with a word like sombrero.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like umbrella and sombrero. If you think about them together, you reach
Yes.
sombril, which is to cover yourself and make a shade.
Mm-hmm.
We also have loan words from the native languages, like I never realized that our word for a hangover is babelas, and that comes from Zulu. Babelas.
Fabelas.
It is a language that is used by a lot of people who don't all look like me. It is a language that people are reclaiming in interesting ways. Different dialects of the language is getting more exposure now than they did before, which I think is fantastic and so interesting. And I really hope that people will have an open-minded attitude and be ready to welcome those people into the language community, rather than approaching it with a us versus them, or with a descriptivist attitude of, well, like they speak a wrong version of the language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Afrikaans is very what's the word I'm looking for? It's very inventive in how it makes words.
Mm-hmm.
Like a sandwich, for instance. So to say bread is brood.
Brood.
And if you want to make it a small bread, you have to put a diminutive on it. So then you have broodjie.
Broodjie.
But because a sandwich is 2 pieces of small bread on top of each other, it's closed. And the word for closed is tu.
Tu.
So a sandwich is a toebroodjie.
Oh.
It's a little closed bread.
It's so cute.
Isn't it? And like technically a motorcycle is a motorfiets, a motor bike.
Mm-hmm.
But you could call it a ijsterpaard, which is an iron horse.
Interesting.
Yeah, if you wanted to sound a lot cooler.
Yeah.
Or one of my absolute favorite, this is just examples of how inventive you can be. A chameleon. There are 2 words, and they are some of my favorite words. The first option is that you can call a chameleon a trapsykis.
Trapsykis.
Trap is to step, and sykis is like carefully, slowly. So it's like a careful walker.
Yeah, they are.
Right? And the other option, I think probably the more commonly used one, is a verkleermannetjie. So to break it down, the word for color is kleur, and the prefix ver means it changes. So verkleur is color changing, and then man is man, but it's a little one, so we have to put a diminutive on it. So mannetjie is a little man. So its name is a little color-changing man.
Oh my God. I can't take it.
It's so adorable.
That's so cute. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So Afrikaans, you got points for being cute.
Yes.
What kind of dialects are we hearing in Afrikaans, and where are we hearing them?
So there are 3 main dialects of Afrikaans spoken in South Africa. And then there is also Patagonian Afrikaans spoken in Argentina. Yeah, I'll just very quickly talk about Patagonian because I'm not an expert. But this is a group of about 600 Dutch farmers who, when the British showed up and went, oh, rich country, you got it's ours now, they said, we're not going to live under British rule, and all hopped in boats and went to South America, where the older generation apparently are still able to speak Afrikaans, very influenced by Spanish. You can find little videos online and check it out. It is an interesting and unexpected thing that I really knew nothing about.
Wow.
So there's that group of people who managed to keep language and cultural additions alive to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
In South Africa, the brown population who stayed along the Cape. So the history, like the cliff notes, the extremely truncated version of the history is the Dutch showed up. They were like, we're going to build a garden here because we keep going to Asia. Everyone's getting scurvy. We need some cabbages or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little town sprung up around where Cape is now. And more settlers came. And it was people who already spoke non-standard or non-prestige versions of Dutch, who then interacted with locals. And for a long time, Afrikaans was called kitchen Dutch because it was like bad Dutch. But over time, it became more and more of an identity, and the area got more and more prosperous. And that is also when England became a very powerful colonial power. And they went, that seems like a really profitable gig you got there, so we're just going to come swoop in. And now we're also going to say that English is now the language of education.
Mm-hmm.
So the people who had already been there for 2 or 3 generations, the Dutch colonizers, who by now identified as being native South Africans because they really didn't have that kind of connection with the Netherlands anymore. There was no technology. It's not like they could keep in contact with great-grandma. So, so they all got in a huff about it, rightly so. Nobody should force anyone to be educated in any other language. Got in their ox wagons, went north. They're like, we're going to do our own thing. So more and more separation happened between the people who stayed in the Cape and the people who left the Cape.
Mm.
So this means that the dialect that is now spoken around the Cape Town area, I've seen it called Afrikaaps, which I think is adorable because the Cape in Afrikaans is the Kaap.
Oh,
Yeah.
Afrikaans.
Yeah. So it's like Cape Afrikaans.
Mm-hmm.
And this dialect has more, it is closer to Dutch. It retains more things that come from Dutch.
Mm-hmm.
I say closer like a little, like 2 centimeters.
Yeah.
One, almost 1 inch for the Americans.
Thank you.
Not very. You're welcome. But an example is the word for I in Dutch is ik, ik, and that is how it is pronounced in Afrikaans, ik.
Ik.
But in my dialect, we say ak.
Ah.
So it's like a sound change that happened there. And then there are some little things, like the word for 9 is nege with a g sound. But in Afrikaans, they'll say nege. Or sometimes I think that G kind of is dropped. Like if you said 19, I would say 19 with a g sound. But you can also say 19, where it just kind of glides over it.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it is a very interesting language, much more influenced by contact with the surrounding languages in that area than the dialect I speak. Mm-hmm. And then there are also people who went to the northwest of the country. It's a very dry area. It's a lot of cattle farmers. It's a lot of people who lived on very isolated. I said cattle, but I mean sheep. I literally was imagining sheep in my mind. It's a lot of sheep farming in that area of the country. So again, it was people who were removed from the language population that they moved to the north with. So you have something that is called Oranje Rivier Afrikaans, Orange River Afrikaans, and then you have Zuidwest Afrika Afrikaans, Southwest Africa. So there are definitely differences in the way that things are pronounced. And typically, if you speak to someone from that area, you can kind of place where in the country they come from based on how they speak. And something something that I never knew until I lived in the US and the internet was a thing that I had access to is the oldest example of written Afrikaans was in the Arabic script.
Stop it.
I know, right?
Wow.
Yes. And now that I've learned Arabic, I can read it and it is trippy.
That is something else. Yeah.
Right, and we have the Malay population to thank for this, who most of them practice the Muslim faith, but most of them did not speak Arabic anymore after a while, and so in order to make the ideas accessible to the population, but also they had to go to school there, like I guess church school. I don't know what the correct term is. The teacher, the imam from Cape Town, wrote down I guess he translated some of the Quranic text into Afrikaans, but wrote it in Arabic script. This was at least 100 years before Afrikaans was declared to be a language.
That's so interesting. This has been quite the enlightening conversation with you, Liza. I'm really enjoying chatting with you. So in all this talking about languages and I've learned so much from you, tell us how we can get in touch with you if we want to follow your progress on learning Tunisian Arabic.
Yeah, absolutely. I am on Instagram. I have a language learning Instagram so that I don't overwhelm my non-language enthusiastic friends with language content. And that account is Liza Learns Languages, with a full stop in between each word. I could be more active. I'll try, but okay. I do post on there.
I will put your Instagram in the show notes for this episode so that people can just click and reach you right away.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I've had so much fun chatting with you. Thank you so much for this time. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, it's only my only topic ever.
I love it. I love it. I like to end each episode with the same question, and that is, do you have any jokes, popular sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Tunisian or in Afrikaans to share?
I thought a lot about this question and I have too many answers.
Oh boy.
But I did think of an expression in Afrikaans that I like and that I thought would be very accessible to an English speaking audience to understand, and it's a little bit of sass. So if somebody is including you in something that you don't want to be included in, they're like, well, we're going to do this later, and you're like, excuse me, why are you including me in this? The Afrikaans expression is quite old, and it comes from before we standardized to using kilograms, when we still used ounces and pounds. So the expression is, hoeveel ons is in jou pond? And to explain that, ons is the word for ounce, but it is also the word for us.
Ons.
So you're saying, how many us's make up your pound?
Ooh.
Like, why am I being included in the total of what your pound makes?
That's a clapback. I like that.
Yeah, I like it a lot too, where you're like, excuse me, I was not consulted on being included in this.
Can you teach it to me?
Absolutely. The first word is hoeveel.
Hoeveel?
Hoeveel.
Hoeveel?
Mm-hmm. That means how much, how many.
Hoeveel?
Onze.
Onze.
Is.
In
Jou.
pond.
Hoeveel onze
Hoeveel onze
is in jouw pond?
is in jouw pond?
Hoeveel onze is in jouw pond?
Hoeveel onze is in jouw pond?
Tada!
Whoa. That first word.
Hoeveel.
Okay. I'm going to practice that.
Who, like the who's from Whoville.
Who.
And feel. It's kind of like feel, but you just have to change that vowel. Feel.
Hoeveel.
Hoeveel. Almost.
Almost.
Yeah.
I'll take almost.
Yeah, very good.
I love this. I love to, I don't want to say I love to struggle with it, but I love to try, because I'm actually terrified of like saying stuff wrong. But in all these episodes of doing this and having these conversations, like, I'm at least comfortable to fail. And I think that's a good place to start.
I think so. And I think the best you can do is to just give it a shot, see how it works out. If you say it wrong, it's not even a big deal.
Yeah.
People don't mind.
Yeah. And if
then
people laugh, they laugh. It's fine.
Yeah. And if they laugh, just laugh with them and go, oh, did I say that? Let me try again. And then the word that I wanted to tell you about, Tunisian, because this is the way that you greet somebody in Tunisia. Really, it's only used in Tunisian. And the word is haslema.
Haslema.
There you go. The first letter is really ein, which is quite hard to say, and I don't really say it right, but I try. I try.
Hard.
Yeah. So you can see the link between salem, peace, like in the big formal Arabic greeting, but it's just an adapted way that is the common polite way to use in Tunisia. Aslema.
That rhyme is
ein.
I'm gonna get it one day, or I'm gonna get as close as I can one day.
You can do it. It took me months, but finally, if I really think about it, most of the time I can say it.
Yeah, I know. Well, thank you so much again for this conversation. And before I let you go, don't think about this too hard. Pick any language you desire, but in this situation, after we've been chatting for a while and talking, having a really fun conversation, we're saying goodbye. What is the best way to say goodbye in the first language that you can think of?
In Tunisian Arabic, you can say bislema.
Bislema.
The B means with, and slema is with peace, so it's like go with peace.
Bislema. Bislema, Liza. Thank you so much again.
Yaishik, thank you.
Thanks again. I'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.